Welcome to IndoctriNation, a weekly conversation series about protecting yourself from systems of control. I'm your host, Rachel Bernstein.
You are not alone. And now there are two resources that I've put together specifically for your journey. This is your host, Rachel Bernstein. I am an educator and a therapist and a cult specialist, and I am very excited to announce Restart and Restore, a journal for survivors of manipulation, and a companion notebook that I've put together to go with it that has people's stories that they've shared with me that they wanted to share with you, and some wonderful quotes from people whose thoughts I truly admire, and more pages and writing prompts for you to continue with the writing that can help you along your healing journey. This isn't just another blank journal. It's a trauma-informed recovery companion, and it offers psychoeducation on the mechanics of manipulation and control and therapeutic writing prompts to explore your history and your strengths, practical exercises that transform insights into some actionable steps, and the freedom to heal at your own pace. You can do it in the time frame that works for you without any judgment or pressure. Whether you joined the organization or the relationship that was controlling as a teen or as an adult, Restart and Restore provides the structure and, I think, validation needed to process your experiences safely. I'm also excited to share, beyond the journal and its companion notebook, that I'm currently working on a second journal specifically for those born and raised in high control groups or high control family units, as their healing journey often involves different and specialized challenges. Restart and Restore and its companion notebook are available now, and you can find the link in the show notes. Thank you very much. I hope it's helpful to you or to someone you love. Hello, everyone. Dr. Natalie Fabert is our guest today. She is an associate teaching professor at Arizona State University, and she teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in social psychology, clinical psychology, psychopathology, group dynamics, including the psychology of cults, addiction treatment, and professional issues in psychology. She serves on the board of directors at the Lalich Center on Cults and Coercion and has collaborated with Dr. Janja Lalich at the Lalich Center to develop an 8-hour self-paced online continuing education training for mental health clinicians to help them to learn how to effectively work with survivors of cultic abuse and coercive control. A licensed psychologist in Arizona, Dr. Fabert also maintains a part-time private practice where she works with individuals who are facing a range of mental health concerns with a particular focus on trauma and abuse, including cultic abuse. Natalie earned her Master's of Education in Counselor Education and her PhD in Counseling Psychology from Arizona State University, followed by a postdoc residency in psychology at the University of California, Davis. Here's Natalie now. I am delighted to have Natalie Fabert on the show today. This is, I feel like, a long time in coming. You know, when you hear about people in your field and you really want to have a chance to get to know what they're doing and what they're creating, and also a little bit more about them, about what brings them to this, because I'm sure that's a question that you get asked. It's a question I get asked a lot. What drew you to this kind of work? I would love for you to take a few moments to introduce yourself, and then we'll start talking.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel. And I've been listening to this podcast for years, and I'm just so excited, so starstruck to be here. I've learned so much as just a person interested in this topic, and as a clinician, about cults and coercive control, and even just about how to interview people, too, from listening to you. So I'm just so happy to be here. So I am an associate teaching professor at Arizona State University. So that's my full-time job. I teach mostly, teach undergraduate and graduate psychology courses. I teach psychopathology, social psychology for undergraduates and graduate students. Taught those types of courses for many years. I teach sort of classes on clinical psychology. I've taught addictions courses before. And my favorite class to teach is a special topics course called the Social Psychology of Cults. That is, my favorite course to teach, and something that I had been kind of bugging my department to create for many years before they finally got sick of hearing me ask them and let me start teaching the course. I also have a part-time private practice, so I see individual adults with general mental health concerns and symptoms, and with a bit of a specialty in working with survivors of trauma and abuse, both childhood abuse or abuse, group level abuse, cultic abuse. I also work with the Lalich Center on Cults and Coercion with Dr. Yanya Lalich. I'm a member of the board of directors there. I'm a professional advisor, and I have been working on a continuing education program for clinicians to educate more clinicians about the nature of cults and the experiences of survivors, and different techniques that could potentially be helpful. Dr. Lalich and I have collaborated on making that course, and you've contributed as well. So we have some different experts that we've invited to give some tips, because, as you know, there's just not a lot of folks with a specialty in this area, which is too bad, because there's quite a lot of survivors that want to find competent therapists who really understand the types of experiences that people go through, and that even understand what a cult is, or what coercive control or cultic abuse or religious trauma can look like. Yeah, so we're thankful for all of the experts that have also contributed to that course. So that's a little bit about me. I mean, as far as how I got interested in this topic, I really don't have an interesting origin story. I was never in any kind of group that I would consider a full-on cult, although I just, certainly looking back, have had a lot of culty experiences that can help me which I think a lot of people have if they really sort of know what to look for, that can help me feel like I relate to certain experiences. But I think it's honestly just the same as the whole nation was, around 2016, people starting to be more interested in dark persuasion and power and control. And that's really just the same as when everybody else was getting into this topic. There were some just different types of media producing these kind of shows, and better documentaries were coming out, and the Me Too movement. And then, so I just was interested, like a lot of people, just all of us are really right now. But I think I had that background of the intersection of understanding social psychology, having had a specialty in trauma and abuse. So that kind of helped me to sort of have a different perspective on what I was seeing. And that's really how I got interested in this topic. So yeah, not a very interesting origin story, but
Oh, no, very interesting, not dissimilar. I mean, this is not something that I experienced personally. This is through a family member. This is through just being interested tangentially, but it does something. Like it connected with me on so many different levels, and I thought there's something to this. There's something that's drawing me to this. I think also knowing that there are not a lot of people doing it, but there are a lot of people suffering with it. And so if there are not enough resources, that also can make you lean in. Like, you know what, I think not only am I interested here, but I'm needed here. that does change things, right? That was part of it for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I just wasn't, I was doing a lot of reading and listening. It's very clear, and we're constantly hearing stories, as I'm sure you are, of people going you know, to unpack their experiences and having therapists not, just their jaw, drops, or they think that you're delusional, or they think, they're asking about, your relationship with your parents, or they're not getting it. And I think it's learning about what happens with some of these experiences really changes your whole worldview. And that's really hard. And I think if you don't have that perspective, you're maybe not going to be sort of meeting somebody where they're at. There's just so much confusion, there's so much misunderstanding, and it doesn't seem like there's enough people kind of trying to set people straight about what's really happening. There's just like a handful of you guys out there talking about this in a way that really resonates. So yeah, absolutely. Just saw that also as an opportunity to, like, okay, well, maybe I do have some, when you really unpack what is going on here, it really is a lot of these different intersecting disciplines and subdisciplines, psychology and counseling. So wanting to also help provide that perspective as well.
I think also being able to be a professor, I think it's such a gift. I love teaching. I love knowing I have a teaching credential. It's actually interesting when I think of putting together a talk, I have my old sort of lesson plan structure in my head that I remember doing by hand or on a typewriter with whiteout, which took forever. But oh my goodness. But there is something about at the time when I was first teaching, I didn't love question and answer period because that sort of took me out of what I had prepared for. Now that I'm not saying I know everything. God knows there's so much more, and I learn, and that's why I love speaking with people like you, or where there can be an interchange and learning more, and I think that's fantastic. But I love Q&A now because it gives me a sense and a reminder and kind of perspective on what people are interested in, what is most on their mind, what are the questions that haven't been answered yet. And so that is incredible. And so I often will write down after I've given a talk what the Q&A questions were, because I think that's something maybe to do an episode about, or that's something to do an article about. Like, this is the reason that they've come to this, or they've wanted to have the bravery, because for some people who have anxiety, it takes bravery to raise their hand, right? To just ask a question in front of other people. I'll tell a very brief story, and I want to come back to you and developing a curriculum and how you narrow it all down, which is very hard, and organize it and give it credibility. Like, this is a real thing, because when I started in this field, it was, nah, just weak people get involved in these things, and cults don't exist anymore. That's a lot of people would tell me that. Oh, they went out in the 70s. Like, what? Who? Where
Yeah.
have you been? But I remember teaching a class. I was filling in for Dr. Donnie Whitsitt at USC, and she wanted me to teach a class on how to do group therapy for people who had been abused and controlled and manipulated within group settings.
Hmm.
Right? That's a very hard thing to do, to help people feel safe and comfortable, and it's an ongoing effort when I do groups, and also more of the learning from, like, I learn from the people who say, "Well, is the reason that you asked me to introduce myself to a new member second instead of first, was that because I took a sip of my tea during the last group and that seemed disrespectful to you?" And I'm thinking, "I don't even remember that you did that." And it just makes me feel sad knowing that in the family of origin story for them, or the cult story, or the marriage story, whatever it was, those are the things that happen. Those are the things that were punishable because of, if you're a narcissist, that's going to seem like you're going to get the, what I call the how dare yous. How dare you have a, right? But I remember teaching this class, and there were a lot of young people in their 20s at USC. A lot of them look like LA proper kind of people. I don't know how to describe it. Just, kind of beachy.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful and blonde and whatever.
Right. And mostly women, young women, and some men. And I thought that was great. And in the back of the class, there was a man who was over 6 feet tall, big, hulking guy, tattoos everywhere, on his face, everywhere. And he's in the class. And after the class, he stayed around and was just taking care of some work. And I went up to him. I said, can I ask you a question? I said, "Don't mean to single you out." He goes, "Oh, no, that's okay. I know I don't fit in." I said, "Oh, it's not about fitting in as much as I feel like I'm looking at you and I think, here you are. Do you have a story? Do you have a story you want to tell about how this all happened?" And he was one of the first guests on the podcast, actually. He was in gangs and he talked about gangs being cults. And that's what drew him. And then when he got into jail because of the things he had to do to prove himself worthy of being in the gang, he got in a gang in jail. That was the way you survive, and he just couldn't get out of the cycle, and it was who he thought he was. And he's now a social worker, I think works for Catholic Charities, and had a lot of his tattoos removed because it was not who he was. He said, "I look very scary." I realized that. He said, that was my way of saying, "Leave me alone." It was so interesting to see what draws people, but also in those moments of teaching, you get to meet people who have their stories. I love that.
It is fascinating. And I think you also remind me of another reason why this is a fascinating topic, which is all the different sort of populations and experiences that there's so much overlap with, like certainly gangs, human trafficking, family systems, abuse, toxic workplace, and kind of understanding it from this perspective and kind of being more inclusive about what the shared experience that somebody like him would have with other people who've gone through something that we call something totally different, but really structurally, systemically have the same thing. It really reminds you of how applicable it is.
Right. So I'm wondering just about, before we get into this curriculum that I'm so happy you're putting together with Yanya. And Yanya has been a guest of the show, so some of you might remember her name as you're hearing it. I'm interested to hear about your background in knowing about and working with trauma and abuse and the link here, because sometimes people, when they can't find a cult therapist or a group or something, they'll sometimes go to these other support groups or these other people who have these areas of specialization. And they'll sometimes say it fit almost totally. Like there was this missing part about the coercion or something. There was this piece missing, but still it fulfilled this need for someone to really have their trauma really known and heard and treated, and also the whole betrayal of it. So I'm wondering, just for you, what you bring to this based on that training and that background.
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I think thinking about coercive control and abuse and cultic abuse, there's so many similarities. The targeting of the victim, the what the grooming, which often looks like the social persuasion and sort of the frog in a boiling pot experience, and then breaking down your sense of self, and then the end of the continuum with kind of control by any means necessary. That is something that we see in all of these different types of populations. And I think with abuse, there's like single incident abuse, which is, or, violence, which could be turn into maybe a post-traumatic stress disorder. But then there's the more chronic interpersonal violence that is more subtle, that is more longer term, that's interpersonal in nature. And especially when it starts at a younger age, when you're more developmentally sensitive, whether it's happening in a group or, with group psychological abuse or cultic abuse or religious spiritual abuse, or whether it's, in a family system and there's not really necessarily any religious component to it or kind of belief system component to it, it can still end up with similar symptoms of complex PTSD because of that chronic interpersonal betrayal, like you said, and the effect that it has on the individual's sense of self and safety in relationships. So while somebody with like more of a non-complex, non-interpersonal sort of PTSD reaction, you might have some hypervigilance or triggers from loud noises or whatever reminded you of that single incident trauma. But when you have interpersonal violence, it's going to be the people, relationships, even yourself, your own feelings that trigger the trauma, trigger the hypervigilance or the spiraling of thoughts, or whatever it is, whatever kind of symptoms are your go-to symptoms. That's a lot more complex and confusing. That's where I see there being a lot of overlap, is some of the impact that it can have on your development and your functioning.
Right. I'm wondering about that, about the development, because I think we see in the news that there are so many people who are abused, who are not believed, who are not taken seriously. Even the language around it, there are people who will talk about having been judged, that, there's so much of the adding insult to injury, like, well, why did you go to that party and why were you wearing that? I mean, those are sort of the standard, unfortunately, shouldn't be a standard. I remember, and this is a nonpartisan thing that I'm about to say, so just people remember that. But in the news recently, a lot of the people who as girls were abused, I'll just say the Epstein case. What was really interesting that happened yesterday was Representative Nancy Mace was in the meeting where some of these women were coming forward and telling their stories about what happened to them as girls. And she left with her face was all red. She had been crying. She said she had a full-blown panic attack while she was listening because of things that had happened to her, and it brought it all back. So this idea that it stays in you and it affects you and it can come out sometimes in these moments, we realize how much more help we need. Like, it's still there. But what have you noticed is the long-term impact, not only emotionally, but even physiologically?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that it stays with you, and different incidents or events in your life will trigger those feelings, and it kind of is in the body. So often there's this disconnect between our thoughts and how we are feeling, both emotionally and physiologically. And when we have that disconnect between like what we believe now, but what we're actually feeling, then that means it's like trapped in the body, right? It's trauma that hasn't been processed in a really robust way yet. And I mean, I guess that's kind of what you're saying is, and I that the earlier, the earlier in development that you have these experiences, and the more you're kind of trapped and have nowhere to talk about what's happening to you, to give you framework for it. You're in a community that everybody's on board with the abuse. You're told that the abuse is good for you. You start to dissociate, right? You start to be like, well, I need to detach what I'm feeling in my body or in my emotions with how I think about this. And you're kind of always in this state of dissociating, from your own truth and your body. And when you don't have somebody to come home to and say, this happened to me, and have them say that shouldn't have happened, of course you're feeling hurt and scared and all of those things. You just don't develop that language, and you start to doubt yourself, and it can be very frightening and kind of stick with you for a long time in ways that are a little confusing, I think, for people. that can stay kind of trapped in the body. And that's why a lot of healing from any kind of interpersonal chronic trauma and abuse and manipulation often does take a lot of getting back in touch with your feelings and your physiology and learning to be more of a friend to your whole system as a whole being, and so that you can just be as one together with your uh behaviors and thoughts and feelings and the physical things that are happening in your body, and kind of learn to cope with them and be a better friend to yourself in that way, and not feel like you have to dissociate all of the time is a very big part of healing from trauma.
I love your phrase, to be a friend to yourself, a friend to your system. That is beautiful. This idea that you can accept those parts of you that, the idea of the negative introject, this sense that you are supposed to be critical of the self, that people who are punished in their cultic groups or in their relationships for, I don't know, falling asleep during an 8-hour pontification by the leader who thinks that their voice is the most important in the world, and you're 5 years old, right? Or whatever it is. I mean, it's just outside the realm of what can be expected developmentally, just in terms of being a human being, also being so exhausted. But that you get to honor and be gentle with. And I feel like that's sort of a friend in my mind, sort of honoring someone, being kind and being gentle with them and understanding to give that to yourself. That's sometimes a hard sell. I don't know if you've noticed pushback on that. Well, but I shouldn't, or what have you seen?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The pushback, as I'm sure you've seen as well, because it's scary to accept yourself, and you've been kind of told also to fear it, to not want to accept yourself and to almost have a phobia of accepting your feelings and your thoughts. That's the whole part of the coercive control, is you start to be afraid of your own internal experiences. And so yeah, and so it makes a lot of sense that you would have a reaction to even somebody kind of wanting to go with you, because both being told that those experiences are not okay, or you should shut them off or ignore them, but also there's that coping mechanism of dissociation that probably at some point did help you to survive, and was maybe the best thing that your little child system could do at the time. And it was a very important way for you to cope. And so when you are kind of confronted with that, or even realize that that's happening, it can be a little bit jarring and scary to think that somebody's going to take away that, there's a part of you that doesn't want to take away that coping skill, maybe like unconsciously or whatever you want to think. So there's a number of reasons why it can feel really threatening to even have somebody be pointing that out.
So my goodness, there's so much to talk about. I think just with time permitting, now if we move into talking about what you're putting together with Yanya, Dr. Lalich, I should call her that. She's been a friend for a long time. Um, so sort of tell me how it got started and how it's developed and who it's for, because it's so important, I think, for people to realize what resources are out there and what is available to them, so they don't have to feel ill-equipped, I think, and someone is putting it together. So go for it.
Yeah. And I just will tell my story of starting to work with Yanya is interesting. I mean, I always have for my graduate students in a class that I teach on professional issues in psychology, where part of it is them learning about different types of psychology in related fields, and they have to go out and find somebody doing something that they're interested in and interview them. And I had a student who actually reached out to Dr. Lalich and scheduled an interview with her. And I was just shocked that she would agree to make the time to talk to my student. And I just couldn't believe it. And, even thought, just because I knew her work and was just such a fan of the contributions that she made to this field. And so then I was like, well, if my student has the guts to reach out to her, maybe as the instructor, I should reach out to her. And I was working on developing the class at the time and thought, of course, she would have some recommendations, which she agreed to. She just loves this work so much, and she just says yes so much. And she's 80 years old now, and it's just amazing, the energy that she has still. Yeah, and that's really how I got connected to her. I got the guts to even reach out, thanks to my student. And so then we started working together, and it kind of went from there. And I had always wanted to do a continuing education course training for clinicians. And of course, Dr. Lalich is really the expert on this topic. She's been doing it for 40 years plus. And so we thought, she's trying to retire. She's trying really hard to retire. And we just wanted to kind of do something that she wouldn't have to go fly and do a lot of kind of one-offs, that it was something that would be more scalable, and something where it wouldn't be so tiring to her to do a lot of recorded interviews with her. We just want something that can reach as many clinicians as possible, something that you have really the basics of understanding this social phenomena and these experiences, and kind of synthesize the research in a way that's easy to understand, and first and foremost will help you to do no harm when you do work with this population. Because I think at one point it was estimated that like a third of therapists will have somebody who is either in or survived cultic abuse, and that often doesn't even know it. I mean, I started noticing some of these patterns on my existing caseload before I ever kind of was out talking about this topic, just from starting to read about it. Therapists don't realize, and often the clients themselves don't realize, what they are or have experienced, and they don't have words for it. And so we just don't want to do harm by saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, or by thinking one thing is happening, not being able to ask the right questions, or, just saying, like just same as grief work or trauma, you have to, or any kind of subpopulation or cultural group, you have to have some competency, not just to do good, but to do no harm. And so that's really the first biggest goal. And I think therapists really do have a lot of the background that's needed that you can then plug in. There's just that understanding more specifically about what happens and how it works, than the sort of the therapy and the therapeutic techniques that we already know. And some of what we already know about social psychology and trauma can start to fill in the gaps and fall into place. So it's not like therapists don't know anything. I really want to make sure people know that sometimes a therapist with certain, experiences in working with populations who are survivors of abuse and interpersonal violence is at least as important, and complex trauma, that's at least as important as understanding cults too. So there's just a lot that can be said about kind of the way that therapists are trained, et cetera. But it's a particular population. It's a particular population, and like any population, you need some multicultural competency to work with this group. And so, yeah, it's a online, asynchronous, self-paced 8-hour training that, again, you can start at any time and complete the class from your computer or from your phone. We try to make it interesting. There's a lot of lectures that are probably, me talking, that are maybe the least interesting, but have all the research and the things that, the kind of the didactic content. And then we have a lot of interviews with Dr. Lalich. We have these cameo appearances by cult experts like yourself. And we have also video testimonials from cult survivors, including some that you've probably seen, in some of the documentaries that a lot of people have watched. And that's really important too, to kind of hear from the survivors. Kind of like on your show, you really center the work around the stories of the survivors to understand their experiences from their perspectives. Yeah, so that's kind of about the course. And it's right now we're as a center, we're approved by the American Psychological Association to offer continuing education credits. We're in the process of applying to other professional organizations for their sponsorship as well.
That's very exciting. And yes, I think it is a good motivator for therapists if they know they're going to be able to get continuing education credit. And so that is really smart to have that be available. I think it's interesting too, and I'm sure that you've dealt with this as well. There are a number of people who I've met who have gone into this kind of work through coaching or through therapy, and they'll think that they are qualified because they say, "Oh, I was in a cult or I was in a bunch of them," or whatever else. And so that can get you a sense of what it feels like, but it doesn't mean you're qualified. There are things that you really still need to learn to do. And also there are certain personalities that are problematic that I've come across with people who feel they don't have anything they need to learn. And that's going to be a problem, especially when they're working with these kinds of clients who have already dealt with that, and the fallout from that.
100%. I think this is sort of the like questions more generally that we talk about in like the field, right, of therapy. It's like, do you need to have a certain experience in order to work with that population who have had that experience? And is it helpful? Like at one point, there's, even if you are survivor of any particular trauma or you've had certain experience, sometimes if you haven't done your own work, you can get triggered. You can over identify with your client in a way that's not helpful. And so I kind of think what's best is if somebody has maybe had some similar experiences and done the education and training and gotten the clinical experience and worked through their own stuff. And then you're in a place where you could be really therapeutic to work with that population. So it's a very big and important point that you bring up, and probably could last a whole podcast to talk about turf wars and who's qualified to do what, and at what point, are, how we as therapists have to always be thinking about what populations we're competent to work with and how our own stuff is and our own experiences, that we bring to the table, how that impacts our work. But in general, yes, you're right. Just because you have had a cultic experience doesn't mean you're qualified to do therapy. And our certification course, the certification, anybody can actually sign up and take the class. You're not prevented from taking it, but the certification, it's really intended to be for folks who already have a certain background training and in fact have already gone through not only an undergraduate program in a related field that helps them meet the prerequisites to get into some kind of a master's or a PhD graduate program, and then even in many cases are licensed already to be a therapist. So there's a lot of background knowledge that we're sort of presuming that folks have. And then this is an additional certification that really only counts if you are already somebody trained in the field of therapy or counseling. Again, totally can still take the class if that's not you, but the certification part is for folks who are qualified to be some kind of a mental health clinician. So that is an important thing to keep in mind. We do want to create more general education, general interests courses. I know that you have a lot of webinars and you have, there's already a lot of education out there that's more general interest. And so we'd like to make something too, but there's a ton of stuff out there that would be more of a general interest type of webinar or training.
Okay. I think it's great also. I mean, I think about how much need there is to educate people also at a younger age. I mean, I remember putting together a whole curriculum on coercion. It was for high school students, and then it ended up not being used because they just thought it's not so important. And I thought, yes, it is. But I couldn't convince them. And so, because I mean, people on the podcast have heard me say this that, I've used trigonometry never in my life, right? Like, thanks for that head spinning semester. But also, it would have been so great to have that instead be learning how to speak up for yourself, learning how to detect manipulation, just the things that help you stay safe as you move into the world. But I think also therapists sometimes feel constricted. And I've had clients say to me, I saw a therapist who was very nice, but anytime I brought up this subject, they changed the subject because it was sort of outside the realm of what they knew. So I think being able to hand therapists some ideas about what this is, but also, as I'm sure is woven in to what you're putting together, the tools. Like, so how do you transmit that and how do you help people with that can help a therapist be able to stay on this subject and have a person, I think, really feel heard.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, you want to have like it on your radar so that if it comes up, also you know not to dismiss it, and you have some at least some open-ended questions that will help figure out if is this really like a clinical issue that we need to get into, and have that self-efficacy to do something about it, right? It's hard to want to go somewhere when you don't know what you would really do about it if you were to uncover it.
Right. So I think it's so nice to be able to put it together to also have that idea of now we have all this information. How do we share it? Similar to why I put together the podcast here. I'm hearing all of these stories. I shouldn't be the only one hearing these stories. These are important stories. These are cautionary tales. These are ideas for people about what can happen or how you break free. And here, I want to put one out. Here you go. I want to give it. I know that we're about done with time. It is such a pleasure to talk to you. And I want people to know where to find you and your work online and the course if they're interested or they think it would be good for professional friends of theirs to find out about it.
So you can go to the lalichcenter.org, LALICH center.org. You can see Working with Cult Survivors, a basic certification course for mental health clinicians, and click the purple button, Join Here. So that would be how you would learn more about the course. You can learn about the learning objectives and everything that you need to make a decision about whether or not you'd like to commit to that training right now. And yeah, my website is drfabert.com, DRF as in Fred, A B as in boy, ERT.com. And yeah, that's about it for how to contact.
Nice. This is great. So good to talk to you. Hope to talk to you again. And it would be nice to check in down the road just to see how it's all going and how many people have really been affected by this, trained by this, educated by this, have had their skills fine tuned so they can be a more equipped resource out there.
Yes, that would be great to check in, and it'll hopefully help us to also see what would be like a good part 2 or how we can revise it and that kind of thing. So it'll be interesting to see who it resonates with. Thank you so much for letting me talk about this class. It's been a real honor and a real pleasure. So really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been great to talk to you. Hope to talk to you again soon. One more thing before you go. Thank you so much to Natalie for being on the show today. It is quite a challenge when you think about doing something for a number of years, and then someone says, "Can you teach other people how to do it?" I have been in that kind of situation where someone has said, I need you to narrow down, basically, into a couple of hours of teaching what you do and how you know what you do. And there was a time that someone said, it would be good if you wrote a book about the work that you do. And I am actually in the process of doing that now. But the interesting challenge is that over the years, as Natalie, I'm sure, can attest to, you do things because you learned them, but also they become second nature. They become sort of intuitive. They become innate. And if someone were to ask me, why is it that you decided to start with those questions for that particular client, or that you decided to sit where you sat in the room, or you offered them some tea before they started talking? I mean, there reasons for this. And why, when you are doing your support groups, do you have a certain way of running them? Do you assure people that if they need to introduce themselves, they can keep the camera off if they want, if it's on Zoom, or they can use their name or not, or they can share or not, or that the order that you're calling on them to introduce themselves is not meaningful. It's just based on the order that their name appears in the attendance list and participants list. There are so many things that after people have been kind of used and abused and controlled and manipulated, that they need to be reassured about. And they need to be able to be made to feel safe. And that if they don't treat you a certain way or compliment you or something, you're not going to punish them. You're not their cult leader. You're not their controlling partner. They rely on you being professional. They rely on you having boundaries. They rely on you reassuring them that you're not going to be keeping them in counseling and therapy and the support group for longer than they want, just because you have the need for them to need you, as it happens in so many cults and with so many people who are narcissistic. These are all things that are important to put into words. These are things that I learned by doing over time. There were times that I would get emails from clients who would say, "It seems that you were upset with me, and whatever I did, I'm sorry." I used to get those a lot, and I thought, what is coming across? And I realized that just commonplace things, like if I went to the waiting area and got a client a minute late just because I was having trouble with whatever it was, or I couldn't find my charger for my phone or something, or there was traffic and I just got into my office, that wasn't a message for them. And now I know to say something if a person is new. I mean, if someone is someone I've been working with for a while, they know to trust me and that they don't need to get any kind of message from those kinds of things. But for someone new, I now know to say, "I'm really sorry that I was a minute late getting you or going on to the Zoom call. I needed to do this, or it was because of this." Now, not that I have to share about my personal life to everyone, but sometimes if there's something I can say that's reassuring to the person so that they know this isn't going to be repeating itself, is it? That I now have to worry that the next person I'm entrusting myself with is someone who is going to be trying to give me these passive aggressive messages, or is going to already be punishing me in some way, or testing me to see if I'm going to respond or get upset. It is incredibly tense for people coming out of these experiences to entrust you, to lean on you for help. It is something I give people so much credit for doing, just taking that risk, taking that chance. And I will often tell people that they can interview me. And again, there are things that I might not share because they're private, but if they want to know how long I've been doing this, if they want to know if I've had experience before working with people from that group or these kinds of relationships, yeah, ask me, find out. When you're dealing with someone, though, who has ego in the game, they won't tolerate you asking them questions because they won't hear it as questions. They'll hear it as being questioned. And this is what other people who are coming to you have had to deal with so much emotion, so much reaction, so much overreaction, so much punishment. And so to be able to get these messages across, along with teaching about cults, teaching about manipulation, but just sort of how to fine-tune the work for certain populations and to put that in some sort of comprehensive form or a lesson plan, to put together a program like the program that Natalie and Yanya have put together is a lot. It's a lot of planning and a lot of crafting, but it's a wonderful thing that it's available. And for people who are out there who want to do this work, who want to be able to learn about not only how to be sensitive to what people want, but how to really acknowledge how much they are bringing into that space with you based on their experiences. These kinds of programs are important. Listening to the podcast and hearing also what people really need and what sensitivities they have because of the ways that they've been harmed, the ways that they've been tricked, the ways they've been betrayed, the ways they didn't realize they were being tested, but turns out that's what it was, and they were always going to fail that test. I can't imagine. I can't imagine then showing up for some sort of help and hoping that a person in a position of authority is someone who is mature or someone who is professional, who's going to be someone you can trust. It is a difficult process. And I value when I can engender feelings of trust in another person. And also, if they are worried about something, that they can put it into words. Natalie's work is really, really important, and also because it's trauma-informed. And there are people who will now say, as part of their description, that they do trauma-informed work because it's sort of a term that has become sort of a buzzworthy term. But that still doesn't mean that just because someone puts that on their description as a therapist, that they really know how to do that. They really have had that experience. So still, if you're searching for therapists out there, find out what training they've had. Find out how much experience they've had. Find out if they say they are trauma-informed, meaning they're going to be sensitive to people who have experienced trauma, that they really know it, that they really know what to do, and they really have been trained. You're worth it. You're worth finding that out. So take a little extra time to make sure that you are going to be in good hands. Thank you again to Natalie for her insights, for her background, for her interest in doing this work and in teaching it to others. Take good care, and I'll talk to you next week.
Thank you very much for listening. Please support IndoctriNation on Patreon at patreon.com/indoctrination. Be sure to give us a follow on our social media. Find us on Facebook and Instagram using @IndoctriNation Podcast. And for Twitter, find us at @_indoctrination. We love hearing from you too. So send us an email at indoctrinationshow@gmail.com. And for more updates on the show, visit our website at www.podpage.com/indoctrination.
If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.